from this space, Ethos Sin Frontera, we send you a cordial greeting and invite you to listen to our topic today, virtual aesthetic. And to develop this topic, today we invite Dr. Justin Harmon. Justin holds a Bachelor of Art in Philosophy from the University of Houston, a Master of Philosophy from the University of Houston, and a Doctor of Philosophy from the University of Kentucky. Justin has also been a professor at those same University. He currently serves as faculty member at Southern Oregon University in the USA. On this occasion, we will speak with Professor Justin Harmon with the purpose of translation that they make together with Professor Silvia Benso of a book titled Estetica del Virtuale by Roberto Diodato, a book that explores the aesthetic and ontology of the virtual body and that addresses a very topical topic in our contemporary society. The relationship that is currently established between the image as a virtual product and the living body, an interaction that occurs between image bodies in virtual world with which we currently interact through topical computer means technological prostheses of the human body. So let's go with this. Let's deepen the connection between aesthetic and the human body in virtual environment. We go with this, Justin. What does the aesthetic? What does the aesthetic mean in this context, and how it relates to our experience of being in virtual space? In addition, why is it important to understand how the images work?
Thank you. Well, aesthesis means sense perception for the ancient Greeks, and can also mean a kind of logic of sense, as elaborated by thinkers like Deleuze, but already indicated in the work of Baumgarten earlier, and arguably Aristotle in his De Anima, for example, where aesthesis, the category, has its own logical order that's independent of but parallel to noesis, or intellection. So the question for us is this: what is the logic of sense with regard to the living body immersed in virtual space? And what's interesting about the status of the virtual body, and also its status as image and its functioning as image, is that it involves both aesthesis and noesis, perception and intellection. As image body, the virtual body can only be known sensibly through a corporeal gaze, just like any typical physical object, but is at the same time a mathematization of space, and its images are the actualization of algorithms which give the virtual body a depth that exceeds the surface level of more conventional images. And the algorithm is constituted through the writing of code, which is of course intelligible, not sensible, can be grasped by the mind, not the bodily sense organs, but is dependent on interaction between a user and the virtual environment, a user and other users' avatars, interacting with various digital objects, and so on. So the image bodies are also event bodies. They're both objects with which one can interact and events of interaction that can't be fully determined by the underlying script. And so this feature introduces a certain level of creative novelty and surprise to the experience of virtual worlds. And finally, we'll say that the hybrid character of image bodies reflects how in the virtual environment, the givenness of images as images tends to break down. So when we engage with conventional images, whether analog or digital, in paintings, printed ads, television, or even in the confines of our own imaginations, etc., we implicitly recognize them as images or copies of something that's absent. The virtual object, in contrast, it shows itself as image, but also as something more than image. That isn't a copy of anything else. It's not a simulacrum. It's an original entity that's produced and altered and alterable in real time through that very baseline interaction that we were talking about.
It is an entity that changes its real time through interaction. Very good, Justin. That was a good introduction to the subject. Regarding what to tell us, I think about the problem of duality. In an increasingly permeated world by digital technology, a fascinating debate about how the duality between the virtual and the real impacts our perception of reality is emerging. This dichotomy raises fundamental question about the very nature of the human being experience and the way we interact with digital physical environment. Taking this into account, how does the duality between the virtual and the real, the structure and interpretation of our conception of reality affect?
Well, strictly speaking, Deodato rejects the duality of real and virtual. Rather, the virtual makes up a particular dimension that is always at play in the real as real. So if anywhere, the duality here is between the virtual and the actual, not the virtual and the real. And in this specific framing, the virtual is like Aristotle's concept of dunamis, or potentiality. So in a bronze statue, for instance, the bronze endures as bronze in its infinite potentiality to take on a variety of forms, despite being arrested in this or that finite form at this particular moment. And following the hermeneutics of Gadamer, he sees the virtual as a mimetic expansion of being, of reality, and not, again, a copy or a representation. But here mimesis is understood as methexis, in its participatory rather than purely imitative sense. So consider from this perspective how, for example, a landscape painting participates in and thereby augments and enriches the natural scene that it refers to. So that scene or moment in the natural world is now different than it was before the painting or whatever existed. So if this is true for conventional images, it has to be true much more so when it comes to virtual image bodies. And these reflect the real in its very making, in its active production. And further, Deodato, taking the cue from Deleuze, and more recently Philippe Quéau, thinks of the virtual as the ongoing differential source from which the more or less stable identities that we interact with emerge in various processes of actualization. So like the differences between users' own bodies and their digital avatars, between such avatars and the virtual environment as a mathematization of space, whose actualized appearance is always different from what is objectively given in the code. The virtual is within the real, in the forms, essences, concealed causes, goals that one wishes to realize, and so forth. To paraphrase Quéau on that. So the virtual is an active but inscrutable principle that is always at work. It's always already at work in the real.
Yes, that's how it is. The virtual is a hidden active force constantly influence reality. However, we must emphasize from an ontological perspective, referring to the question of the existence of a virtual body, that leads us to reflect on the fundamental concept of being and reality in the digital sphere. Justin, from an ontological perspective for you, what are the fundamental criteria that delimit the existence of a virtual body versus physical one?
I would say what most essentially distinguishes the virtual body from physical bodies is the virtual body's genesis through interaction, as I said earlier. Of course, many relational ontologies, from Hegel to Haraway, posit the irreducibly interactive character of identity in general and maintain that even our physical bodies are, in a sense, mediated or socially constructed. But for Diodato, the bodies that we encounter in everyday, just typical non-virtual space are not constitutive events in the way that virtual bodies are. And this ties in directly to how such virtual event bodies are much more robustly amendable. They can be changed much more readily than our everyday material phenomena. We can't amend or change a physical object through a sheer act of will, even though we interact with it, perceptually at the very least. Whereas in contrast, nothing can prevent a user from radically transforming the appearance and thus one's experience of any entity in the virtual field just by a simple act of will. And this is so, especially given the direct connection that virtual bodies have to the sites of a user's nerve impulses through these sophisticated devices, these technological prostheses. But of course, this doesn't mean that there are no limits and that one can affect or manipulate these objects in any way one likes. Comparatively, I mean, there are even limits to how far a dreamer can change or affect the entities of their own dreamscape. We're not the authors of our own dreams, that is. So the point here that's important is just that virtual objects are subject to this kind of interactive mutability in the strong sense in which physical objects are not. Now, aesthetically, the experience of virtual reality in this regard may have the effect of attuning us more intimately to the relational being in the weak sense of the everyday entities that we find in the physical world.
It's true. Virtual reality can improve our aesthetic connection with everyday relationship and object. Creating virtual world is a complex process that depends largely on writing and computer programming. And when examining the role of computer writing in this process, we can better understand how digital environments are developed. We can better understand the impact of these digital environments in our understanding of reality. According to this, Justin, what really is the role of computer writing in the creation of virtual world?
Well, computer programming, the writing of code, these aren't aspects of this area or field that I understand very well, admittedly. But I can say this, computer writing is of decisive importance when it comes to the creation of virtual worlds. The script serves as, if you will, the atomic substratum of the virtual environment and also of the interactive image bodies, these event bodies that come to populate it. And without this substratum, no phenomenalization, that is, no coming to appearance, would happen at all. In the language of Husserl's phenomenology, the code contributes much of the noematic or structurally objective side of the generation of virtual objects. But again, to emphasize this, however indispensable the writing is for this process, the specificity of phenomenalization, of coming to appear, that's derived in this way from the code, requires specific choices and acts of interaction on the part of users. In other words, users' choice, which can always be unpredictable, is a necessary condition for the possibility of actualizing the active but still inscrutable potentiality that's afforded by the script.
However, interaction occurs mainly in virtual environments. our social relationships are strongly influenced. Thinking about the interaction between the bodies of the image and their relevance, the question about the digital representation of the bodies in virtual worlds that refer to reality arises. How its virtual interaction reorganized in our perception of reality and in our perception of digital identities, particularly with respect to representation of bodies in virtual worlds. Tell us, Justin, tell us about this, the implication of virtual interaction in our social relations.
Well, I think the implications here are subtle but profound. Um, as I suggested in one of my previous answers, I think the experience of virtual bodies as these constitutively interactive event bodies can have the effect of more intimately calling our attention, the awareness of users, to the relational nature in the weaker, ordinary sense of all entities, as well as to the ways in which the relatively stable identity of objects, which we would say is a necessary condition for their recognition and appropriate response to them, is a product of difference, as there can be no relationality at all without difference. And even of difference in Derrida's conceptual vocabulary, where meaning is always deferred virtually to other meanings in an unfolding without any kind of end. And it shows us that the boundaries by which we mark and carve out identities in the world are porous, and that our bodies themselves can be seen as a hybridization of the organic and inorganic, a hybridization between biology and technology, as Donna Haraway famously puts it. Also interestingly, who one is, one's very identity in a virtual environment, is never a simple, straightforward matter. The subject, the external user, is at once an object in the form of their digital avatar that's navigating the virtual space. So one becomes, in a strange sense, other than oneself in the very process of becoming oneself as an actor in the virtual environment. And so this may result in a greater apprehension of the inescapably ambiguous character of one's being a subject object in the world, of seeing oneself and others at the same time as same and other. And so in this way, maybe our assumptions and kind of lazy social biases can be problematized or called into question.
To conclude, Justin, I would like to ask you about the state of existence of virtual bodies, ghostly beings that are not real. The statements of a character in a video which endure beyond the body of the original character, similar, of course, to the existence of character in history and perhaps in literature.
Well, there is certainly a ghostly or spectral aspect to virtual bodies, given their ephemerality and how they're specially constituted through interactive difference. But there's also something undecidable about these objects, insofar as they exist or exist out of, they're phenomenalized beyond the computer code that undergirds them, while never actually transcending that code, but remaining immanent to it in the virtual space. But the code is what anchors such beings to what we call objective reality in a way that characters in literature or in one's literary or fantastic imagination are not. That is, the code endures whether there is a user present to actualize it, but the actualization is never exhaustively prefigured in the code, lending virtual objects much more to what William Desmond has described as ontological surprise, or the possibility of of a surprise that's anchored in being. But in another sense, figures in history and also historical events are virtual objects. They're not latent possibilities waiting to be realized, since the reality is established and can't just be erased. Rather, their virtual being prefigures and awaits actualization along very specific lines in the present. And to paraphrase Simone de Beauvoir on this, history, or the past, it exists in the manner of an appeal towards the future. And the virtual itself can be seen as an ever-shifting repository of forces, active in difference, that appeals to the future of interaction and also of creation here. So the past is, of course, structurally different from the present. Like the virtual, and also like Merleau-Ponty's ontology of the flesh, to which Diodato refers in the work, it is difference in its ongoing being without ever disappearing or annulling itself in the specific differences.
And that would be all today. Again, thank you very much, Justin, for your participation and your excellent disposition.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you today.